Friday and a blessed Good Friday to all who celebrate. Welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, joined again by Jessica Burbank. Jess, good morning. Why don't you kick us off?
Yes, Amber, the former president's election interference trial in Fulton County, Georgia, wrapped up yesterday with no ruling. Trump's legal team argued that political speech is free speech. Prosecutors argued that it's, quote, too premature to consider First Amendment arguments and that it should be brought before a jury. Additionally, they maintain Trump's indictment is not protected by it. There is no trial date set yet, but Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis wants the trial to take place ahead of the November elections.
Meanwhile, Trump's criminal hush money trial is just around the corner, April 15th. That's what Judge Juan Merchan ruled in terms of a start date. Merchan wants Trump as well to zip it. He imposed a gag order on the former president Tuesday, a gag order that Trump has already defied when he took to Truth Social saying, quote, Judge Juan Merchan is totally compromised and should be removed from this Trump non-case immediately. His daughter, Lauren, is a rabid Trump hater who has admitted to having conversations with her father about me, and yet he gagged me. So, Jess, that last portion there in terms of Trump going on Truth Social to attack the judge's daughter, The Spectator had an exclusive report to indicate that that Twitter account that was allegedly dragging Trump did not even belong to the judge's daughter. So that was a misfire on his part. Apparently, Laura Loomer was the one who found that account and boosted it up to Trump's attention. And then it turned out that her account was basically taken over by someone else a year ago. So that was not a good look for him. Now, on the Georgia trial, the president's team is, of course, arguing that he should have this dismissed on First Amendment grounds. They're still trying to get Fani Willis removed from the case. What do you think is going to be the ultimate outcome of this Georgia case?
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to be able to get a court date before November. We know that there's a huge backlog in our legal system across the country. It takes, months at a time for cases to be heard. We do have months ahead of November, but the way this case is going, it's quite complicated to be able to get a jury together to go through the voir dire process for a case, of this scale and magnitude, the amount of documents that they're going to process for this case. It's going to be a lot. So I would like to see a jury trial. I would like for Donald Trump to be tried without any mentioning of First Amendment rights, because this case, quite frankly, doesn't have much to do with the First Amendment when we're talking about emails and text messages sent between Schaefer and Trump, talking about finding more votes or discounting votes that were cast in the direction not going towards Donald Trump. It's not really about free political speech in this case. It really was, some collusion around an election, and we do need a jury to make a decision on that. Trump, furthermore, wouldn't be able to say, oh, it's political prosecution against me, it's the judge and his daughter, they hate me. If it's a jury process, Trump has said before that it's biased, but to have a jury convict him, it just makes it seem way less like political prosecution than if it was directly coming from a judge. So I would like to see that happen. I think that makes the most sense for how this case moves forward. But to make it be about the First Amendment when it's not is kind of my biggest qualms with how Trump is handling this. He could say I'm innocent instead of saying it's protected under free speech. But I think because of the nature of the records, email and text messages, everything's in writing. So it'd be hard to argue, I didn't do what they said I did.
I think one of the complicating factors for the prosecution here is that they have suggested that the problem with what Trump said about the election is that it was untrue. So what they're saying is that it's central to the quote unquote conspiracy to overturn the election that Trump didn't really believe that he had actually lost or that there was some kind of irregularity or fraud within the election. So I do think that in that sense, the First Amendment does matter. Are you allowed to lie? Are you allowed to say things that you don't think are true? And that's going to be a complicating factor for them. I mean, in addition, this phone call that he had with the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, all of the charges related to Trump's alleged pressuring of officials in Georgia have been dropped. There were 6 charges related to that against Trump and his alleged co-conspirators, and all of those were removed back in early March, actually, in mid-March. That was Scott McAfee. He said that in a 9-page order that 6 of the 41 counts were going to be dropped, and they were, again, related to pressure that Trump or 5 of his co-defendants allegedly put on state officials to change the results, and that included that phone call with the Secretary of State. So I don't think that this is a cut and dry case by any means. They're basically going to have to allege that what Trump said publicly was not protected under the First Amendment if he was lying in order to further some kind of criminal conspiracy. And I don't think that's as straight of a line as they would like it to be.
Right. I think it's going to have to be Trump's word against Trump's word to prove, that he really didn't believe he won the state of Georgia, as he said he did in the call. I mean, to say we just need to find 11,780 votes. Can you find the votes? Where are they? He did follow this up with a statement, because we won this state. And so in this conversation, it does appear to be him believing the votes out there exist and were cast legitimately by people participating in the election, who were of voting age, who were allowed to cast a ballot, that there were legitimate votes that were lost, right? But I think other communication where Trump does seem to indicate that he does know he lost, it could be Trump's word against Trump's word, where this then becomes an ask to find votes that aren't there, and him saying because we won this state is him manifesting or him suggesting, right, we won the state, you'll find the votes, when really he's asking them to find votes that weren't legitimately cast. So I think that's what it's going to come down to, is can they legitimately prove that Donald Trump, did think that he lost the election.
In other Trump news, attorney John Eastman might be disbarred for his role in allegedly trying to help overturn the outcome of the 2020 election. In a 128-page ruling, California Judge Yvette Rowland found Eastman guilty of 10 of 11 counts filed by the California State Bar last year. Rowland also wants Eastman to cough up $10,000 in fines to the State Bar of California Client Security Fund. Eastman is Trump's former election lawyer, who was the supposed architect of the plot to allegedly overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. And I find this incredibly troubling. I know John Eastman. I've interviewed him. I actually interviewed him after all of this happened and was very skeptical of a lot of his claims. And you actually can't even watch the interview on YouTube anymore because YouTube took it down, but I think it's available on Rumble and some other places via the Steamboat Institute. And I, despite being incredibly tough with him, was pretty satisfied that he was not trying to overturn an election. What John Eastman's arguments were focused on were providing the former president with legal advice on the legal avenues that he could take to challenge an election that he believed was conducted fraudulently. And one of those avenues of advice was related to a sort of legal gray area within the 12th Amendment of the Constitution and how the Electoral Congress certifies its electors. If it were an avenue of disbarment for lawyers to no longer be able to practice because they were trying to advise their clients on potential different legal avenues, including legal gray areas, there wouldn't be very many lawyers left in this country. That's basically the main tenet of their job. And in this ruling from the judge in California, she says in her recommendation for him to be disbarred that his position would likely be unanimously rejected by the Supreme Court, basically describing what he advised Trump on to be a fringe legal theory. But if that's the case, I mean, you have Democrats who pushed essentially a fringe legal theory to remove Trump from the ballot in places like in Colorado and Maine, and that was rejected 9-0 by the Supreme Court. So would those individuals not also be eligible for disbarment? It shouldn't be a crime. It shouldn't be a reason for disbarment for someone to offer legal advice in areas like this when there's no proof that they acted fraudulently, that they acted unethically, or that they advised their client to do something illegal.
I think if Democrats that were as upset as they seem to be genuinely felt the way they portrayed they felt about elections being stolen in the United States, we would have seen much more legislation drafted in piecemeal. So rather than putting a bill together with many changes to the process we have, the democratic process we have in the United States for elections, instead it should have been okay, here is more federal funding to go to ensure we have the proper amount of staff at each polling location, that we have enough polling locations to service the population of any given county based on turnout in previous years and based on where it's been reported that there are extremely long lines. There should be more people verifying that the ballots being cast are legitimate. So often you have ballots being processed and then being rejected, and the person who cast the ballot, it's too late before they have time to correct it. If they really cared about the integrity of our elections, there would have been a lot more legislation and a lot more investment in the future integrity of elections. And that was just something that was missing. You had the January 6th hearing before Congress, and the entire time that I was covering it, I was saying, what's going to come out of this? They're going to make some kind of legal recommendation. They're going to put together some kind of flagship legislation that would never pass in a bipartisan manner, when clearly the integrity of our elections is demonstratedly a bipartisan issue. So there should have been a way forward where there was changes made to how our electoral process happened, and maybe what people could say about the legitimacy of an election publicly if they are someone who ran in an election, that a part of being on the ballot in a general election means you don't cast doubt on the integrity of the process, something to that effect, to prevent hysteria in the future until we have enough evidence gathered and the election is verified. There needed to be a lot more changes legislatively and funding and budget-wise to how our democratic process happens if they actually wanted to convince the public that's what they cared about. It seems that they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfortunate that there were all of these changes made to the election process so close to November of 2020, given what was going on with the pandemic. And a lot of those changes were not implemented either effectively or efficiently. And you ended up having a lot of confusion surrounding the election, which did lead to a lot of these legal challenges related to whether or not states, one, had the authority to even do this, and two, if they were counting ballots correctly and perhaps counting ballots that were not legitimately cast. One final point on the John Eastman story is he says in a recent interview that the judge who was looking at his case left out exculpatory evidence, including legal briefs from at least 6 state attorneys general who had agreed with his assessment of the certification of the 2020 presidential election results. She said apparently that those were not relevant. Now, in even more Trump news, Twitter's calling it a Trump pump and dump. The Trump Media and Technology Group, trading under the ticker symbol DJT, entered the stock market at $70.90, with shares ticking up to $79.38, only to fall $4.26 down to $61.96 on the NASDAQ. So this is related to Trump's social media company, Truth Social, Jessica, which was surging when it first started public trading. It boosted Trump's his net worth by about $4 billion, potentially giving him the opportunity to use the stock value to help pay off some of the bonds that he has to post to appeal these legal decisions. But now the stock is sort of steadily following. The Truth Social platform itself is apparently not super profitable. So people are accusing him of a pump and dump. What do you think?
I think that anyone working in the business of assessing the value of assets and using assets as a leverage point to issue loans is going to look at this and say, yeah, we're going to need some more data to ensure that, this trend that it's maintaining its value or increasing value in the stock market has some keeping, right? That this isn't just something that's going to have a lot of excitement around it because Donald Trump's talking about it right now. His base gets involved, and then suddenly we're not interested anymore. We don't actually see the profitability of Truth Social long term. We just bought stock in it to support our boy Donald Trump. If I was a loan servicer, I would look at what's going on here and say, this might have value today, but will it have value even 3 weeks from now enough to back up a $464 million loan? Obviously, banks don't service loans in that amount independently. They sort of hedge those loans with a few different banks sharing the risk. But I think in any case, getting involved with Donald Trump's legal case and have him backing up his bond payment or his payment in full of this settlement with a loan based off of stock and Truth Social, I just don't see it happening.
We'll be back. More Rising after this.